It was an ordinary Tuesday morning at St. Jude's Hospital. The corridors were quiet, save for the rhythmic squeak of a janitor's cart. Near the heavy double doors of Operating Room 4, a woman stood alone. She wore no scrubs, no lab coat, and no ID badge. She just watched. Her eyes were fixed on every moving part, every flickering light. Suddenly, she took a single step forward. She reached out and adjusted a small silver dial on a standby monitor. A nurse froze. Inside the OR, the lead surgeon stopped. He looked up, scanning the glass. "Wait," he whispered. "Tell me, who is she?" She didn't have a name to the morning staff. To them, she was simply the lady of the 6 a.m. shift. Every single day before the sun had even cleared the horizon, she would arrive. She didn't use the main entrance where the grand fountains played and the marble floors shone under crystal chandeliers. Instead, she walked through the side service door, the one used by the technicians, the delivery drivers, and the people who made the hospital breathe behind the scenes. She wasn't dressed like a professional in the modern sense. She wore simple, charcoal gray slacks and a muted blue sweater that looked as though it had been washed 1,000 times. She looked like someone's grandmother, or perhaps a retired teacher who spent her afternoons in a quiet garden. But there was something in her gaze that commanded an unspoken respect. It wasn't an aggressive look. It was a weary yet incredibly focused intensity. Her eyes were like cameras, capturing data points that others simply filtered out as white noise. There was a specific scent she associated with the building, a mixture of floor wax, ozone from the machines, and the faint metallic tang of sterilized air. To Clara, this wasn't just a building. It was a living organism. She could feel its pulse in the vibration of the subfloor pipes. She could sense its fever when the ventilation hummed a fraction too high. To the modern staff, the hospital was a place of sterile efficiency. To Clara, it was a constant conversation between human intent and mechanical reality. She had a routine that never varied. She would stand near the same corner of the surgical wing, always out of the way, always blending into the shadows cast by the vending machines and the heavy fire doors. While the world rushed past her, doctors checking their expensive watches, interns frantic with overflowing charts, and families pacing with anxiety, she remained perfectly still. She wasn't just standing there. She was listening. She listened to the way the power cables were coiled on the floor, knowing that a tight kink could lead to a microfracture in the copper. She listened to the hum of the air filtration system, detecting the slight rattle that suggested a filter was starting to clog. She observed the way the nurses laid out the sterilized instruments, noting the minute differences in how each person handled the steel. To most, she was a ghost, a family member perhaps, waiting for news that never came. Or maybe an employee from a department no one could quite name, a relic of an older administration. Because she never caused trouble, and because her presence felt strangely stabilizing, no one ever asked her to leave. She was part of the architecture, as reliable as the morning coffee. One morning, the peace was shattered. A young nurse named Sarah, only 3 months into her residency, was rushing toward a code blue in the adjacent wing. In her frantic haste, Sarah's tray tilted. A stack of sterilized gauze packets slid off, scattering across the floor. In the high-pressure environment of a surgical ward, this small accident felt like a major catastrophe. Sarah began to panic, her breath coming in short gasps, her hands shaking as she reached for the fallen items. Suddenly, a calm hand appeared in her field of vision. It was the woman. She didn't scramble. She didn't lecture. She didn't show even a flicker of frustration. She simply knelt down and helped Sarah gather the items that were still sealed. And with a firm but gentle motion, she pushed the contaminated ones aside. "Take your time," the woman said. Her voice was like smooth silk over gravel, low, steady, and strangely comforting. Haste creates the very shadows we try to avoid. You cannot help them if you are falling apart yourself. Breathe, Sarah. Just breathe. Sarah blinked, her eyes wide with surprise. How did this stranger know her name? Before she could find the words to ask, the woman was already back in her corner, her eyes once again fixed on the invisible machinery of the hospital. The woman always carried a small, leather-bound notebook. It was worn at the edges, the spine creased and cracked from years of constant use. Occasionally, she would flip it open, using a small, hand-sharpened wooden pencil, and jot something down. She didn't use a smartphone. She didn't use a tablet. She used the ancient tools of observation. She wrote down timestamps that seemed random. She noted the flicker in the hallway lights at 7:12 a.m., knowing it correlated with the elevator's peak power draw. She noted the way the elevator door in the north wing vibrated when it reached the fourth floor. These were things that meant absolutely nothing to the hospital board. To them, these were invisible glitches that would be handled when something finally broke. But to her, they were the early warning signs of a system under stress. The viewers of this story might wonder, is she a guardian angel? Is she a corporate spy? Or is she someone who knows something the rest of us have simply forgotten in our rush toward the future? The mystery grew with every silent hour she spent in that hallway. She wasn't there for the glory. She wasn't there for the paycheck. She was there because she saw the world in a way that no one else did, as a delicate, interconnected web of tiny parts that could fail at any moment if they weren't loved and tended to. The atmosphere in the hospital changed on a Wednesday. It started as a typical day, but for those who had worked there long enough, the air felt heavy. There was a subtle tension, a static charge in the environment that made people's nerves feel frayed. In operating room 3, a highly specialized procedure was underway. It wasn't a life or death emergency, but it required the kind of extreme precision where a single millimeter of error could mean the difference between a full recovery and a lifetime of chronic pain for the patient. Inside the OR, the team was elite. Dr. Aras, the lead surgeon, was known for his steady hands, his brilliant mind, and his no-nonsense attitude. He was a man who demanded perfection from his staff and his equipment. Everything was going according to the digital plan. The monitors were chirping rhythmically. The anesthesia was stable. The blue glow of the specialized surgical laser cast long shadows against the walls. Shadows that seemed to dance with every minute movement of the staff. But outside in the hallway, the woman in the blue sweater, Clara, felt a shift. She wasn't looking at the patient. She wasn't looking at the surgeon's hands. She was looking at the back of a large equipment rack through the observation window. She noticed the cooling fan on the primary surgical laser. It wasn't making a loud noise, but its pitch had changed, just slightly. It had dropped half an octave, moving from a steady whir to a barely perceptible thrum. To a normal ear, it was just background noise. To a technician, it might have been ignored, but to Clara, it was a siren. The air around the machine seemed to shimmer with a heat that shouldn't have been there. Clara watched the way the dust motes danced in the light. They were being sucked toward the intake vents with a frantic, irregular speed. She checked the time. 7 minutes since the last power cycle. In her notebook, she had recorded that this specific model tended to heat up exactly at this interval if the airflow was restricted by even 10%. She opened her notebook. She checked a page from 3 months ago, comparing her notes. Then her eyes tracked downward to the power cord snaking across the floor. It had been kicked slightly by a passing orderly earlier that morning, creating a sharp 90-degree bend near the high-voltage plug. Inside the room, Dr. Aras felt a momentary lag in the laser's response. It was less than a second, a tiny hesitation in the light. He paused, his scalpel hovering. "Did that feel off to anyone?" he asked, his voice sharp behind his mask. The technician checked the main console. The screen showed a perfect green status. "Numbers look green, doctor. No alerts on the system. It's likely just a minor fluctuation in the building's grid." Aras frowned. He trusted the machines, but his gut was telling him something was wrong. However, the pressure to finish the surgery was high, and the data told him to proceed. The woman in the hallway didn't wait for a disaster. She didn't burst into the room. That would be a violation of sterile protocol and would cause more chaos. Instead, she walked toward the heavy glass door with a deliberate, calm pace. She didn't touch the handle. She simply stood by the frame and tapped on the glass 3 times. 3 short, sharp raps. Tap, tap, tap. It was an old code, one used before the age of intercoms. The head nurse, Maria, looked up from her station near the door. She saw Clara pointing downward, toward the floor behind the rack. Maria followed Clara's finger and saw the bent power cable. At the same time, Clara gestured toward the cooling fan and then toward her own ear. She was telling Maria to listen. not to look. Inside, Dr. Aris saw the interaction. He saw the woman's calm, unwavering gaze through the glass. He didn't know who she was, but he saw the way she held her notebook like a sacred text. He saw the authority in her silence. "Stop," Aris commanded. "Doctor?" the assistant asked, looking at the clock. "We're in the middle of the most critical phase." "Check the primary power line and the cooling intake," Aris said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." The technician grumbled, annoyed at the interruption, but he went to the back of the machine. As he reached the cable, his face went pale. He could feel the heat radiating from the plastic insulation. "The cable is overheating at the bend," he whispered, "and the intake filter. It's nearly clogged with fine dust from the recent construction in the East Wing. If we had continued for another 10 minutes, the laser would have cut out or sparked mid-incision." The room went silent. The green numbers on the screen had been lying. The sensors themselves were beginning to fail due to the internal heat, reporting all clear, even as the circuits were melting. A nurse stepped out into the hallway to find the woman, intending to thank her or perhaps question her. Clara was still there, but she had stepped back into the shadows of the corner, her job done. "Do you work here?" the nurse asked, her voice trembling with a mix of confusion and profound relief. Clara looked at the nurse, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "Not anymore," she replied. She didn't offer a business card. She didn't ask for a reward or a mention in the hospital newsletter. She just watched as the maintenance team was called to properly secure the equipment. The tension in the hallway began to dissipate, but the mystery only deepened. Who was this person who could see a disaster before the most advanced computers in the world could even detect a flicker? The surgery ended successfully. The patient was moved to recovery with a perfect prognosis, and the staff began the usual, weary process of cleaning and debriefing. But Dr. Aris couldn't let it go. He was a man of science, a man of cold, hard facts. And the fact was, a total stranger had saved his procedure, and perhaps his career. He walked out into the surgical waiting area, still wearing his blue scrubs, his mask hanging loosely around his neck. He expected her to be gone, vanished like a ghost into the morning fog. But Clara was still there. She was sitting on a hard plastic chair near the exit, her notebook open on her lap, her pencil moving across the paper. He approached her slowly. "Who are you?" he asked. It wasn't a question of suspicion. It was a question of genuine, humble wonder. The woman looked up, her eyes clear and steady. "My name is Clara," she said simply. "Clara," Aris repeated, tasting the name. The technician said the machine didn't trigger a single alarm. Even the fail-safes were showing normal parameters. "How did you know?" Clara closed her notebook with a soft thud. "Machines are designed to tell you when they are broken, doctor. They are built to alert you when a threshold has been crossed, but they aren't very good at telling you when they are about to break. For that, you have to listen to the rhythm. You have to know what normal feels like so deeply that even a tiny change feels like a scream. It's about the patterns," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The world thinks in straight lines. This happened, so that happened. But reality is a circle. Everything repeats. The machine hums because it's working, but it also hums because it's dying. If you only look at the numbers, you miss the music. And right now, doctor, your equipment was singing a very dangerous tune." She handed him the notebook. Aris opened it, expecting to see medical diagrams, complex equations, or perhaps the ramblings of a confused mind. Instead, he saw something far more profound. The pages were filled with observations of human and mechanical habits. It was a diary of the hospital soul. 7:45 a.m. Nurse Jenkins always leans on the IV stand when he's tired. The wheels are loosening on the left side. 9:12 a.m. The floor waxer uses a different chemical on Tuesdays. It makes the floor 5% more slippery near the emergency exit. Someone will fall by noon. Monday, the air conditioning vibrates at a frequency that causes the calibration of the microscales in the lab to drift. The blood results will be slightly off. Aris was stunned. He turned the pages, seeing months, years of this data. "You've been tracking everything, every single detail." "I used to be the head of systems maintenance here," Clara said, her voice tinged with a faint nostalgia. 20 years ago. Back then, We didn't have screens for everything. We didn't have sensors in the walls. We had to use our senses. We had to know the smell of an overheating motor. We had to feel the vibration of a failing pump through the soles of our shoes. We were the sensors. Why did you leave? Eris asked, sitting down on the chair next to her. I didn't leave because I wanted to, she said softly, looking at the heavy doors of the OR. The hospital upgraded. They brought in the smart systems. The consultants came in with their clipboards and their efficiency models. They told me my role was redundant. They said the computers would watch the cables and the filters. They said human intuition was subjective and unreliable. So I retired. But you're here every day, Eris noted. You never truly left. Because I know that people forget, Clara replied. People get busy. They get tired. They trust the screen more than they trust their own eyes. They think that if the light is green, the world is perfect. But perfection is a lie. Everything in this building is always in a state of slowly falling apart. My job, my life, has been to catch it while it's still small enough to fix with a screwdriver, before it requires a miracle. Eris looked at the notebook again. He realized that Clara wasn't just watching machines, she was watching them. She was the silent safety net for a system that had become too fast, too digital, and too disconnected from the physical reality of its own existence. You saved a man's mobility today, Clara, Eris said, his voice thick with emotion. And you saved my reputation. I would have kept cutting until the power failed. I didn't do it for you, Doctor, Clara said, standing up. I did it because the work matters. The details are where the soul of this place lives. If we lose the details, we lose the people. We become just another factory. She took her notebook back, sliding it into a hidden pocket in her sweater. Most problems in this world start very small, she continued. A loose screw, a tired sigh, a bent wire. People just don't have the time to notice anymore. They are looking for the big explosion, so they miss the tiny spark that starts it. The staff had gathered at a distance, watching the famous, arrogant Dr. Erase talk to the ghost lady. They expected him to offer her a job, a massive salary, or a medal. But instead, there was only a long, heavy silence. Eris realized that Clara didn't want a job. She didn't want to be back on the payroll. She had a calling. She was a reminder of a standard that the modern world was losing. She didn't need a badge to be the most important person in the building. Thank you, Clara, Eris said, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of deep respect. She nodded once, tucked her notebook under her arm, and walked toward the service exit. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what was happening behind her, even without looking. She could hear the hospital breathing, and for today, the rhythm was finally right. Clara's presence didn't change the hospital overnight with a loud proclamation. There were no grand speeches from the board of directors and no ribbon-cutting ceremonies for a new manual observation department. But something did change, quietly beneath the surface, like a slow-moving tide. One night during a particularly busy double shift, a veteran technician found himself staring at a backup generator. He was about to walk away as the diagnostics on his tablet said everything was perfect. But then he remembered Clara. He closed his eyes. He listened. He felt the cold metal of the casing. He noticed a slight, irregular stutter in the vibration, something no sensor had picked up. He spent an extra hour realigning the gears. That generator didn't fail when the city's power grid went down 2 days later. Sarah, the young nurse who had been comforted by Clara, started coming in 10 minutes early, not to check her emails or to scroll through her phone, but to stand still in the hallway. She began to look at her equipment differently. She checked the wheels on the IV stands, not because she was told to, but because she cared about the sound they made. She started listening to the heart monitors, learning the subtle differences between a healthy beep and one that was struggling. The maintenance team, often the most ignored people in the building, started seeing Clara as an ally. They began to notice her in her corner, and instead of ignoring her, they started to ask questions. Clara, does the backup generator sound right to you today? Clara, did you notice anything about the oxygen pressure in the East Wing during the storm? She would give them short, precise answers. She never told them what to do. She only told them what she saw or heard. This forced them to think, to investigate, and to take a new kind of pride in the invisible parts of their jobs. They weren't just repairmen anymore. They were guardians of the rhythm. Dr. Aris changed too. He became famous in the medical community not just for his surgical brilliance, but for a newfound humility. He started every operation by asking his team to take 10 seconds of total, absolute silence. He called it the Clara pause. In those 10 seconds, the team would listen. They would feel the room. They would ensure they were present in the physical moment, not just following a digital checklist on a glowing screen. The hospital became safer, not because they bought more expensive machines. In fact, they stopped buying the latest gadgets for a while. They became safer because the people became more conscious. They realized that safety wasn't a destination reached by buying a software update. It was a constant, quiet, and very human effort. The Clara mindset began to spread to other departments. In pediatrics, nurses noticed when the temperature in the rooms drifted by a single degree. In oncology, technicians noticed the subtle change in the vibration of the radiation machines. The small things were no longer ignored. One rainy afternoon, Sarah saw Clara sitting on her usual bench outside the service entrance. She went over and sat next to her, offering a cup of warm tea. "Do you ever stop doing this?" Sarah asked. "Don't you want to just go to the park or travel? You've given so much to this place." Clara looked at the clouds, the rain reflecting in her eyes. "The world is a giant machine, Sarah. It's always humming. Whether I'm here or at the park, I'm still listening. You don't stop being aware just because you're off the clock. You just learn when to slow down and when to act." Clara's legacy wasn't written in the hospital's annual financial report. It was written in the lives of the patients who went home 3 days sooner because a complication was caught before it even manifested. It was written in the confidence of the nurses who felt more in control of their environment than they ever had before. A small move, adjusting a dial, tapping on glass, had created a wave of awareness that saved more lives than any single surgery ever could. The story of the woman in the blue sweater became a legend among the staff, a story told to every new intern on their first day. Not as a ghost story to scare them, but as a lesson in the immense power of the small. Our world loves the big, the loud, and the dramatic. We live in an era of disruption and grand visions. We celebrate the heroes who fly in at the last second to save the day with a spectacular display of courage. But we often forget the heroes who ensure the day never needs saving in the first place. Clara reminds us that excellence isn't found in a grand gesture. It isn't found in a viral speech or a billion-dollar merger. It is found in the quiet corners. It is found in the way we coil a rope, the way we listen to a friend's voice for the sadness they aren't speaking, and the way we respect the tools of our trade. There is a profound dignity in being the one who notices. In a society that rewards speed over substance, taking the time to be thorough is an act of rebellion. Clara didn't need a PhD or a title to be a genius. She simply needed to be present. She proved that knowledge without observation is just noise. In every office, every school, in every home, there are loose screws and bent cables. These aren't failures of character. They are simply the result of life in motion. We fail when we decide that these things are too small to matter. We fail when we outsource our awareness to a screen and assume the system will catch our mistakes. We live in an age of big data and artificial intelligence. We have sensors that can track our heartbeats from across the room and satellites that can see a dime on the sidewalk. But no machine can replace the human heart that cares enough to pay attention. No algorithm can feel the heaviness in a room or the wrongness in a rhythm. Clara's story is a call to slow down. It's a reminder that your attention is the most valuable thing you have to give. It is a form of love. When you notice a small error and fix it without being asked, you are practicing the highest form of service. You are tending to the world. You don't need a title to make a difference. You don't need a stage to be heard. You don't need 1 million followers to be significant. Sometimes all you need is a worn notebook, a sharp eye, and the courage to tap on the glass when everyone else is looking at the screen. As you go through your day-to-day, look for the small things. Notice the person who is struggling silently behind a smile. Notice the machine that sounds a little tired. Notice the detail that everyone else is walking past because they are too busy to be effective. Because one small move made at the right time with the right intention can change the course of a life. It can prevent a tragedy. It can restore a rhythm. The surgeon asked, "Who is she?" The answer was simple yet profound. She was the person who cared enough to see what everyone else chose to ignore. She was the witness to the details. And in a world that is always rushing toward the next big thing, that is the greatest superpower of all. A single move, total silence, and a life changed forever. What will you notice today? What rhythm will you help restore? The world is waiting for someone to pay attention. Will it be you?